Hello, everybody. Welcome to Geezerology. That's Bob. I'm Scott. And last week we talked about the Doors' debut. Today we're going to follow it up and talk about the second album, Strange Days. I just listened to the album. I've listened to it a few times in the last couple of weeks after not having heard it in a while to refresh my memory of it. I just listened to it again right before we started taping this. So I kind of have an idea what I'm talking about now. The cobwebs of my memory are gone. This album was released in 1960. Was it later 67 or early 68? But it was less than a year after the debut album, and to me, it sounds basically like a sequel to the debut. The big difference that I hear is that I don't think the material on Strange Days is as strong as as the debut. I think that they tried to play around a little more in a studio on Strange Days to negative effect. I think. I think the Doors, when it gets right down to it, I think the Doors were a much better live band than they were a studio band when they started. Playing around and trying to do studio tricks and playing to the studio, they just were not as good. And I think that hurts this album is they tried to pull little tricks and they just didn't work. The opening track, the title track, Strange Days, I never have liked that song. And I understood today when I was listening, I understood why, because they just put a lot of studio gimmickry on top of that song to make it sound weird, and it just sounds weird. I don't like what they did with it. I liked a lot of the lower key pop songs, and some of the songs I believe were actually leftovers, not leftovers, but they were songs that the Doors had been performing along with the stuff on the first album. It's just that, you know, these are things that they've had around a while, but didn't make it on the first album, and now they reworked a couple of them for the second album. I think a lot of the stuff is pretty good. Love Me Two Times, I like a lot. The song People Are Strange, I like a lot. Unhappy Girl, I like a lot. A lot of the shorter 3-minute, I guess you could call them pop song potential singles, I think those are good. What I don't like about this album is the studio trickery. The Strange Days, the Horse Latitudes, which they dropped in the middle of side one, is just god awful. It's there's wanting to show off Morrison's poetry, and at the same time, Rothschild is showing off some of the new tricks that he tried in the studio. And it's just a minute and a half or 2 minutes, however long it is. It's just wasted time. I think it's just crazy. And the other big problem I have is when the music's over. It's just listening to it again today. I understood. I love that song. I love that song on Absolutely Live. I love it. It's just this. Just this chaotic stuff going on all through that song. It sounds like they're just bringing the house down playing the song. They get in the studio with it, and everything is all smoothed down and controlled. It's like, and it's like, you know, everything is done on cue in the studio, and it just all seems so contained, and it takes all the power from that song. Between that 11-minute song, and the 3 or 4 minutes on Strange Days and a couple minutes on Horse Latitudes, that's a big chunk of that album that overshadows, to me, the good things about this album. It is my least favorite Doors album, as I said in the rankings that I wrote on the blog earlier, just because it's just so inconsistent. There are too many things on it that I don't like, that it makes it a slog for me to get through it. Anyway, Bob, what do you think?
Scott, you ignorant slut. Sorry, I had to throw that.
You've been waiting to use that, I know.
No, actually, oddly enough, I agree with you on a lot of what you said. I did the same thing. I listened to the album yesterday, listened to it again this morning. When I listened to it yesterday, I thought it sounded really flat. And so I gave it a second listen today. I agree with you on the studio stuff. They came in to do this album, and the story I've read is that the Turtles had just finished recording in the studio, and they left behind an acetate copy of Sgt. Pepper's before Sgt. Pepper's was released. The Doors heard it and supposedly went, "Oh my God, this is awesome." And they went from a 4-track recording studio for the first album to an 8-track, which today is like primitive, but back then that was like
that was hot stuff back then.
Yeah. So all of a sudden they got a chance to play with the studio stuff, and I agree, it hurts it. I don't deny that. I love the first album because it's organic, and I know you're a prog rock kind of guy and me not so much, but I really like my music organic. I'm not a big fan of studio wizardry. And my thing is, if you can't do it on stage, you shouldn't do it in the recording studio. But that's me. Lyrically, I love the material because most of it came from that early time of Morrison when I think he was at his most creative. Moonlight Drive, ironically, that is the song that caused the Doors to happen. You know, Ray Manzarek is lying on the beach. Jim comes walking by. "Hey, how you doing? What are you up to?" "I've been writing songs." "Oh, sing me one." He sings Moonlight Drive. Ray says, "Oh my God, man, we got to make a band." You know, but they don't put it on the album until the second time. So lyrically, I like the album. This morning, I came back and I listened to it the second time. But this time, I turned on the studio monitors, cranked the volume up, and the flatness really went away, and it sounded a lot better to me. When the
Just
music
needed a little bit of volume.
Gave it a little bit of volume,
Okay.
And I listened to it the first time, you know, on my computer speakers. This morning, I turned on the studio monitors, and it sounded much, much better. And you and I are probably going to, not probably, we're going to differ on When the Music's Over. I love the song. It's probably most people's favorite Doors song. I love the lyrics to it. I don't think the studio version is that bad. No, it's nothing like what they did live. But this morning, I turned off the lights in the room, leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, cranked up the volume over the studio monitors, and damn near had an orgasm. So, I love it. And previous to that second time of listening, I'd have put Strange Days down lower on my preferences. After listening to it this morning, I think I got to move it back up higher on my list. And so that's kind of where I'm at with it right now after my second listen this morning.
I don't know. I don't think When the Music's Over is a bad song. As like I say, I love When the Music's Over on the Absolute Live, and I've heard a couple of other bootlegs and other live recordings of it, and it's fantastic. It's an excellent Doors song. I just don't like the recording of it that is on this album. It's like it's too they have too much control of it, and there's no spontaneity to it. It's just everything is done according to a script. I don't know exactly how to say it, but it's like, you know, everything is right on cue. There's no all of a sudden this burst of guitar that comes out laying over an out of control organ and Morrison screaming his head off. There's none of that. It's just everything is just done according to plan. And to me, it takes away a lot of the power of the song. And it may very well be that you know, it's so good. It's so good on Absolutely Live, and it just pales in comparison to the Absolutely Live. It's like whenever I'm listening to Strange Days and that comes on, I really just want to turn it off and bring up the Absolutely Live version.
Um,
What's you know, and which is and which to me, as far as I'm concerned, that's a failure of that album because it's something. It's a big centerpiece of the album, and I just don't want to listen to it. It's just a slog for me to get through. That,
I don't have that reaction to it. I
okay.
agree. I love Absolutely Live's version. No denying that. But the studio version doesn't turn me off. Maybe because I heard the studio version first and fell in love with it before I got to the live album. You know, and back in my day, When the Music's Over, you know, spoke very powerfully to me back in the day. The environmental section in there was awesome. I think it's some of the best lyrics Morrison ever wrote. Number one, because they were so direct and there was no ambiguity about what he was trying to say. He wasn't going off doing this, I'm the weird stoned out poet and you can't understand what I'm trying to say, you know, and then, you know, we want the world and we want it now. Incredibly powerful statements then. I think it stands up well today. You know, we're still dealing with the environmental issues. In fact, they're probably worse today because of climate warming. You know, I think we have seen a resurgence of young people becoming involved in things again after, you know, the Trump administration. So I think there's stuff in there that's still powerful today that I think has stood the test of time. So if I had a choice between live and the studio version, I would obviously pick the live song, but I still think the studio version was good. And like I say, with the lights turned off and full volume, it sure sounded awesome this morning.
So this album still has that dark, sort of foreboding atmosphere to it, but not. It's not quite as prevalent as the first album. It's a little poppier than the first album, and I don't know which of those songs are left over and which of them were actually written as they were recording this album. I didn't look far enough into it.
Strange Days is new just for this album. I think the rest of them had been around for a while. I know Strange Days was a brand new song. And the story goes that Morrison had showed up at up in Laurel Canyon to the house that Densmore and Krieger were sharing. And supposedly he was in a really down, depressed period. They said, hey, why don't we go take a walk? So they walked up through the hills and stuff and got up to the top peak or whatever. And Morrison, I guess, got his vibe back and then wrote Strange Days. So that is a new song just for this album. Like I say, I think the rest of them are ones that have been around for a while. I do agree with you on one thing, Horse Latitudes. What the hell? You know, yeah. I mean, you're doing some weird poem about horses being thrown off a ship and drowning.
Well, yeah. which is fine. It's like that's Morrison. That's Morrison being a poet, and I get it. I mean, I'm not gonna criticize it. I don't necessarily understand it, but you know, that's part of the thing he was trying to do. It's fine, but it might have been better if they would have taken that and, like they did with American Prayer after Morrison died, taken that poem and put a little musical accompaniment behind it.
Yeah, well, supposedly
that would have been okay, but it's just that, you know, it's just this overbearing, weird.
Well, it supposedly
sounds is going on there.
Yeah, supposedly the three musicians were told make a bunch of noise, and they did, and then Morrison came in but did his poetry on top of it, and it shows. You know, there was just noise in the studio, and then there are a couple of places here and there where I think that they went overboard on the studio gimmickry. I think the essence of the Doors is three incredible musicians who brought expertise from a lot of different genres together. and they had an incredible ability to improvise and go where this manic singer would take them. And I think if you kept that at its essence, that was the Doors. They didn't, I don't think they needed the studio gimmickry.
I mean, their best albums were basically live albums, right? The debut was basically a live album. I mean, they would do 2 or 3 takes probably on things, but essentially what they did is the whole band got in there and they all played the song, and they just took the best takes and put them down. And
right.
the same way with LA Woman. You know, that was essentially a live recording. And then, I mean, the best Doors songs are on the albums are the songs that are it's just a band playing. When I start messing around with a studio, you know, Touch Me, or not Touch Me, it's the Soft Parade, that album, that's a whole discussion about that album. That was strictly a studio album instead of a live album, and you know, you could have a discussion of whether that worked or not, but it's not one of their more acclaimed albums. It wasn't one of their more successful albums. But yeah, the point is that this was a band that was so much better when they all got together and played instead of letting Paul Rothchild have fun at the dials. You know, it's like most of the time when Rothchild started getting in a way, it didn't work.
Well, I don't know who bears the blame for Strange Days, if we want to say blame. The interview that I read with Manzarek is he talks about them having a chance to hear that acetate of Sgt. Pepper's. And Manzarek is quoted as saying that they all thought the Beatles were a teeny bopper band. And then they hear Sgt. Pepper's and they're just blown away. And suddenly it's like, oh man, I want to do this. And Manzarek talks about suddenly finding out all these things he could do in the studio and stuff. So I don't know whether this was Doors driven or producer driven. So I don't know who kind of bears that. If you listen to Manzarek, it almost sounds like they decided to go crazy because suddenly they got these toys to play with. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, the Doors. Yeah. Who knows? It doesn't matter who. It's just the finished product, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't matter who's to blame for it.
No, I think it still works. And I wish they would have been I wish they would have been more organic, like the first album. Again, it works for me because lyrically, it matches a lot of what they did on that first album, with the exception of Worst Latitudes. But so lyrically, it works for me. When the Music's Over works for me because When the Music's Over sounds organic. It doesn't sound like it's got a lot of the studio gimmickry in there. I know you don't like how that it's a controlled studio version. You know, I can live with that.
Yeah, my problem isn't the studio gimmickry on When the Music's Over. The studio gimmickry on Strange Days and Horse Latitudes is awful. But When the Music's Over, it's just the opposite. It's like they pulled back. They pulled back so much on that song to confine it to the studio. It seems like. Because it's like it gave them the opportunity to make that song, to make it perfect, and it's not a song that needs to be perfect. You know, I have no problem with what you're saying about the lyrics and the material and the message they're saying and everything like that. I think it's a great composition. It's just that this particular recording of it lacks.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Okay, What about the end on the debut album? What's your take on it?
I don't get that feeling with that. I think that's perfectly fine on that debut album because it feels like it's part of the whole of that album. Where When the Music's Over, I don't get that feeling with it. It's just the album. Strange Days, the album, is not as uh, is not as perfect uh, I don't want to say product, but Strange Days is not a perfect album. Doesn't all fit together as well as the debut does, and one of the issues I think is that it might very well be because they use the studio too much. Instead of like with the end, I get the feeling listening to the end on the first album uh, that the guys were there like they were the rest of the album. The guys were there and they played the song and they recorded it, said, okay, guys, that's a wrap, put it on tape, and let's go. Where it's when the music's over, as with a lot of the other tracks on Strange Days, sounds to me like they worked too hard to perfect it. It's not a full live take. It's like they did a little bit too much editing, not adding any studio gimmickry or anything like that, but probably did a little too much editing to make everything about it perfect. And to me, it doesn't have nearly the edge or the menace or the chaos that a good performance of When the Music's Over should have.
Okay, so if I'm understanding what you're saying, you're not attacking When the Music's Over, the song, for
no, not at all.
Gimmickry.
I'm attacking this particular performance of it.
You're not attacking the presentation or performance of it because of studio gimmickry, but because they tried too hard to make it clean and perfect.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Okay. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand where you're coming from. And you don't get that feeling with The End on the first album.
I do not, no. But they're two different songs. I mean, The End was just this quiet, slow, it was a low key song all the way throughout. Just this little haunting melodic thing, where When the Music's Over is a different beast. When the music's over, when it's performed as well as it can be formed, it's just chaos. It's Morrison's Morrison being very dynamic. He gets some great screams in there. He gets some. He's yelling something. He gets very quiet on some of the middle passages, but then all of a sudden he has these explosions. Ray Manzarek has these explosions of guitar solos, and Krieger especially. If you listen to Krieger on Absolutely Live on that, I mean, he's just it's like he's just on the verge of losing control of that guitar all the way throughout that song. Where and that to me that's what makes a performance of that song so freaking good. And you don't get that in the studio version on Strange Days, because it's all okay. Now is the time for the guitar solo. Now is the time for the organ solo. Now is the time for Morrison to put out a little shout. It's all just too. It's just all too controlled.
I see where you're coming from. I still can live with. I see where you're coming from. I don't totally agree with it, but I understand where you're coming from.
And this is not something. I mean, a lot of these opinions that I have now are opinions I've had in hindsight. But this on When the Music's Over, this is always I've always had this opinion of that particular performance of that song.
Okay, I didn't have that opinion of the song the first time I heard it, and the first time I heard it was this studio album that I played the hell out of, and then I came to the live album later. And right, they're totally different, and that's what a live album is supposed to be.
Right.
So I don't diss the studio version quite that much, but I want to go off on a weird tangent here for a moment.
Sure.
Okay, you're talking about the performance of this song on the live album and Krieger and his guitar work, and I've felt for decades that Robbie was an underrated guitarist. But if you've ever watched video or concert video, you can have Morrison just going absolutely spastic. And these three musicians backing him up are churning out some incredible, I don't want to use the word ad lib, that's not the word I'm looking for, impromptu following him. But these guys, like Krieger, is doing screaming stuff, but just standing there like, yeah, no emotion. He's not doing a Pete Townsend where he's jumping around. These three guys are putting out this incredible stuff, but they're just like, yeah, we got this. Don't worry about it. And it's just such a contrast between watching them play and Morrison going crazy, even though they're following him wherever he's going and anticipating that. But these guys are just almost like stoic doing it.
Oh yeah. Morrison was all the visual kinetics. There's no question about that. But there are a lot of kinetics going on with those other three guys. It's just all in what you hear, not what you see with those.
Exactly. I mean, but that's just the contrast between the sound they were creating and how stoic they appeared doing it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, you went to a Doors show for Morrison to be theatrics, but for those three musicians to just take you places orally that you've never been before. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, I'm sorry, off on one of my weird tangents.
No, do you have anything else you want to say about this album?
No, I think
what are your highlights with it? What are your highlights?
My highlights? Well, When the Music's Over, probably my ultimate favorite Doors song. Moonlight Drive, I love that. Love Me Two Times is a nice little rocky tune. I like it. I Can't See Your Face in My Mind. That one really kind of gets to my heartstrings.
Yeah. Moonlight Drive might be one of my favorite Doors songs. If I made a list of my 5 favorite Doors songs, Moonlight Drive would make that list easily. That definitely is the highlight of this album, I think.
And that's a song.
A lot of the other stuff is good, but my one playlist song on this album would be Moonlight Drive. I love that song, and like I say, it happened to be the song that Morrison, when he stumbled upon Manzarek on the beach that day, as the story goes, that Morrison recited the lyrics to Moonlight Drive to Manzarek, and it just blew Manzarek away and said, "Hey, we got to work together."
So, real quickly before we shut down, any reason why Moonlight Drive didn't make the first album? Because supposedly
I think I saw on Wikipedia that they said that they tried it a couple of times and they just weren't happy with the way it turned out the first couple of times, and then sometime between they wrapped up the first album and when they started working on the second album, they got a take of it that everybody was happy with. And it wasn't again it's a performance. Apparently they tried it a couple of times on the first album, and just something about it, somebody they just weren't happy with it, and so they tried it again, and all of a sudden it happened for them, so they used it on the second album. Anyway, that's what Wikipedia says. Okay, well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. Please visit us at Geezerology.com. You'll see all kinds of wonderful discussions about all things music on there. Bob and I we'll do about 2 or 3 posts a week on there about many different things. Bob has a Facebook page, Geezerology. Look it up. I have a Twitter account at Geezerology. Look us up. And thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thanks, Bob.